Hi, Rachel. It's so great to have you back. What have you been up to?
It's great to be back. Lots of exciting things here happening here at the Salem Witch Museum. Most new and exciting is the installation of some new artifacts in our exhibit, which is Evolving Perception.
And what can you tell us about that? We hear you have two new cases of artifacts.
Yes, we have two new exhibit cases that are on display. The first case relates to items related to the early modern period witch hunts. So several books written from altering perspectives. So two books written by skeptics of the trials, two books written by demonologists and individuals who were in favor of witch trials. And then our second case has several items relating to the evolving image of the witch. So more contemporary conceptions of witch. All very exciting stuff and kind of a nice way to illustrate the content we talk about in that exhibit.
The exhibits are so great at bringing people through history to the present to understand the witch and the history. How does the Malleus Maleficarum that you have help show that?
Yeah, so the most exciting thing that we have in our collection on display now is a 1600 edition of the Malleus Maleficarum. So we've incorporated discussing the Malleus in this exhibit for years. Our tour guides always talk about it when they're talking about the European witch trials, but it's so much more impactful to be able to see the book in person. So for those who don't know, the Malleus Maleficarum is maybe one of the most infamous books written during the witch trials period. It was, according to Cornell University, it was second in terms of sales only to the Bible for 200 years. So an incredibly popular, very well-read book. And it was essentially a witch hunter's manual. So it would tell you how to identify someone who was allegedly a witch, the characteristics of witches, how you would try them, the procedures you would use, if torture was to be used, how you would use that. And again, this is a very influential book. It's initially published in 1486, so right at the start of the witch trials period. And it certainly molds the direction that witch trials take as the years go by. So our book is a 1600 edition of this very famous text. It's actually, in addition to including the Malleus Maleficarum, it has several other demonological books bound together with the Malleus. So it's a fascinating example of the different perspectives about witchcraft at this time. And it's very disturbing in a way that this book was published in 1600 because that's right at the height of the witch trials period in Europe. The panics are really reaching an extreme at that time. So it's very kind of disturbing looking at that book to think about where it was and who was using it for what purposes during the witch trials period.
What language is the text in?
So ours is a German edition. It was published in Frankfurt, Germany.
And the books that you have, these early modern works, represent a range of perspectives on witchcraft. How do they illustrate how witchcraft perception evolved during that time period?
I think it's really interesting that we have two skeptics books in our collection as well, because it does show that there isn't this kind of uniform acceptance of witch trials or witch hunts, even during the kind of peak witch hunting period. The second most fascinating book we have in the collection is Johann Weyr's. So Weyer is a Dutch physician, and he writes this book in the 1560s, essentially saying that, well, the devil's real, the devil's powers are not to be questioned. Many of the people who are accused of being witches are women who are distracted or suffering from melancholy. So he argues that instead of being punished, these individuals should be given medical treatment, which is quite a revolutionary argument, especially if they're 1560. So our book in our collection is a 1586 edition of that work. So that's a really fascinating contrast to the Malleus, because that book is obviously published before our Malleus Maleficarum, the 1600 edition. So it's just showing that there are arguments to be had throughout that period about the powers of the devil, the powers of his followers. How do we handle these accusations? What kind of punishments should be used? It's quite a range of perspectives. And then to follow with that, another one of the books we have on display was published by Andrew Morton, which is a pseudonym for Daniel Defoe, author of Robinson Crusoe. So his book is published in the 1720s, and he is arguing very much in favor of the supernatural. The supernatural world is real, it's dangerous, ghosts are real, there are these kind of invisible dangers around us all the time. So that's a really interesting book to be published when it was, because that's when witch trials are really winding down. There's a lot of skepticism being articulated during this period. So it's really a fascinating illustration of the range of beliefs regarding witchcraft and witch trial.
And the other thing that the museum helps people take a look at is the witch in pop culture. Do you have some new additions to that exhibit?
Yes. So we have 4 items currently on display. This is actually we have a collection of items we've been slowly building over the years. And so this is actually just a small part of the collection we now have, which is very exciting. So the items relating to the evolving image of the witch has been a little bit easier to collect, obviously, because they're sometimes easier to come by than the early modern text. But what we have on display right now are a couple of books that relate to very modern versions of the witch. We have a first edition of Gregory Maguire's Wicked, which was signed by the author during an author event that we held here at our museum in 2019. We have a first edition of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire that was signed by J.K. Rowling. And then we have some kind of interesting earlier pieces. We have a grimoire from the 19th century, which is a book of magic. It was published in France during a time when this style of publishing was getting very big. Publishing these kind of cheap, small books, and particularly grimoires, was on the rise. So we have this kind of amazing example of what witchcraft becomes in popular culture. Everybody is interested in magic as they are today. And so our illustrated grimoire is beautiful. It has these kind of colorful illustrations in it. And the most disturbing element of that grimoire is instructions for creating something called a hand of glory, which, without getting too detailed, is essentially this item that you would take the hand of a corpse, a hanged criminal. You would do all these things to it. You essentially mummify the hand, and then you would have it hold a piece of wax, a candle that was made from the fat of a hanged man. It all sounds very like hocus pocusy almost. And the idea was, if you used this object, it would allow thieves to enter a house undetected at night. And that's actually a gruesome piece of magical history that's referenced by J.K. Rowling in Harry Potter several times. So it's amazing that our grimoire, it has the illustration for the Hand of Glory, which I will share on our social media in the coming week. And it's very gruesome. It's very unusual from the other content in the grimoire, which is palmistry and folk remedies and the creation of talismans, things like that. And then you've got this kind of creepy necromancy going on. So that the instructions for creating the Hand of Glory was actually omitted from other editions of this same book. So the fact that it's in the book that we were able to acquire is quite remarkable.
Wow.
That is really fascinating.
It is. It gets me excited for the season of October.
Yeah.
And how does the public follow you on social media and keep up with events?
So you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, and our handle is at Salem Witch Museum on all of those platforms.
All right. And we know this project is part of larger renovations to the museum. What can visitors expect to see next?
We are in the midst of a long series of renovations. Updates to the second exhibit space have been going on since about 2019, when we started working on refreshing some of the displays in there. I would say that the installation of these artifact cases is the kind of final piece of those renovations. But we have been working for years now on a broader series of updates to our main presentation, updating the scholarship in there so that it's in line with the most contemporary discoveries, refreshing some of the displays. Some of those figures are in there from 1972 when the museum was founded, so definitely in need of some updates. We've been working on that project for years, and it seems every time we get rolling, something catastrophic happens. The front of the building started to fall off at one point. COVID struck. We had some illnesses in our upper administration. It feels like we need to bring a modern witch in here, honestly, and do some sort of staging or something. But we are back on track with those renovations. We don't have a final date as of right now, but I will say we are in the midst of the project. It's a very exciting time for our museum, and hopefully it will all be done within the next few years at most, barring another disaster, knock on wood.
I got to enjoy a tour a year ago, May, and your tour guides do such a great job of engaging visitors to the exhibits and answering questions and offering thought-provoking questions. Really made the tour great.
Thank you. Yeah, we're so lucky to have wonderful staff here, and I think it's a testament also just to the history. It's fascinating. Once you get bit by that bug, you guys know it's very hard to separate yourself away. And especially now that we have more content available on our second exhibit, we're faced with the wonderful problem of there's too much to talk about in there now. So
Oh,
and
yeah.
keep our tour guides on the time schedule they need to be is our next challenge, which is a wonderful problem to have.
Is there anything else you would like to share with us today?
I think just anybody who's interested in coming to see the exhibit, please do. I will say though, especially if you're local, you live in the North Shore, this is obviously, we're in the peak tourist season from the summer through the fall. I would honestly almost hold off and come visit us in the winter when you'll have a little bit more space in the exhibit. The pros and cons of having a beautiful historic building is we are certainly always needing more space. If you're able to come during the off season, you'll have a little bit more of a leisurely time looking at the books, but they are on display. This is a permanent installation in the exhibit. So if you're coming to Salem and you'll be here in the next year or so, come by and see our exhibit, Witches of All-Day Perceptions, and those new artifacts that are on display.
And how do guests obtain a ticket?
So we sell same-day tickets. So you can get them on our website, which is www.salemwitchmuseum.com. You can reserve a ticket for one of the timed presentations. They're every half hour throughout the day, starting at 10 a.m. And again, you can reserve them on the day of your visit.